Good morning, Empowered Artist community. Happy Monday. So we won't be doing a Mindset Monday today, but we'll be carrying on with our Art and Mindset Challenge. So today we're going to be talking about perspectives and values. The reason I kind of did this challenge is that we want to kind of gain some sense of community, because I think it's really nice to have connection and conversations to obviously give you value, and hopefully these tips will really help you in your art journey. And maybe you're feeling a little bit stuck, maybe you've got artist block, or maybe you're just feeling a little bit uninspired in your art journey, because it kind of changes, doesn't it? It goes up and down. And I think it's really important that mindset and why we do the things that we enjoy, and keeping that positive mindset around the things that we enjoy, is really important. So I'm a real mindset advocate. I think it has such a knock-on effect to everything, and it really goes hand in hand with why we do our art, why we do our hobbies. And it's so important to do things that make us feel really good and to fill our cup. And what better time to do it than in the month of February, when it's the month of love. Valentine's Day is next week. And I thought it was much more important to, instead of having outward love, which obviously is lovely, but it's important to think about how we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, and have some love towards ourselves, and how we can really embrace all of our quirkiness, our weirdness, our little four boys that we think are different or make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, actually embracing them and really celebrating you as you, accepting yourself and loving yourself just the way you are. So that's the point of this challenge. I am going to be offering a more in-depth one-to-one offering, really. It's more about, if you want to know a little bit more about how you can change mindset. I'm a qualified hypnotherapist. I've been seeing clients for the last 15 years or so, probably a bit longer than that now, and I love really to work with people that are feeling a little bit stuck. Maybe they're feeling quite anxious, quite afraid, or have a lot of self-doubt, don't have a lot of self-esteem maybe, and that kind of goes peaks and troughs. So anyone who's feeling a little bit lost maybe, then I will be offering a much more tailored to you solution. So diving deep into what you want to be working on, what you want to improve on in your life, whether it's mindset in your life or your artwork. Is going to be a real combination of both of those. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about that as the challenge goes on, and I'm going to be offering that at the end of the challenge. But for now, let's dive into perspectives and values, which I think is really important. It's actually really underrated when it comes to your drawings or your paintings. Now, perspective is one of those things that you probably take for granted, but it's really important in adding depth to your piece. So, for example, there's been a few, I've had a few messages where people have sent me their drawing or their painting, and they can't work out what's wrong. And a lot of the time it's because that the angle's slightly off or slightly different, and so they haven't taken into account that if your head's slightly to the side, if you've got a 3/4 view, which always makes a really nice portrait, I think, if you're a pet portrait artist, then the ear at the back is going to be slightly smaller. It's not going to be the same. Same with the eyes, same with legs or paws. A lot of the time they concentrate that, maybe they're focusing on something else, and they don't concentrate on the fact that the object behind is going to be a lot smaller. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but it's amazing how many people just fail to see it, and they know something's wrong, but they can't quite work out what it is. So that's definitely something to look out for. And maybe you could practice in your sketchbooks. I really encourage any artist to have a sketchbook on hand and to jot down ideas and to think about how the things that you want to improve on. And instead of putting all your energy into a big piece, and then it feels quite overwhelming and it feels like you need to create this masterpiece, actually it takes the pressure off. So you work into a little sketchbook and you just have a little go at maybe practicing things, because that's what learning and art is all about. You've got to keep practicing and working on the things that you want to improve on. So get your sketchbook and think about some objects. Maybe you could draw a very, very simple object like a cube, or a sphere or something like that, and just maybe work backwards. So you can get a ruler and you can put the line on the points of the cube and then create like a little bit of a point, so a triangle. That's the perspective, and then see how that object gets smaller and smaller as the distance goes back. So you've still got the same kind of ratios within the shape, but as it gets further away, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and how we can apply that to the work that we're doing. The other thing I wanted to talk about with perspective was, if you've got a piece, what parts of it are you putting the detail in? So is it the eyes? Is it the whole face? Is it the whole thing? Now, sometimes people, when they think their work's a little bit busy, or it looks a little bit messy, or again, something's off, but they don't really know what it is, it could be that the focus is everywhere. So you're putting just the same amount of detail in the body, which is a little bit further behind, or maybe even the background, and the viewer doesn't really have anything to focus on. So if you create a piece that actually your intention is that you're going to be adding the most detail to the focal point, which could be the eyes, it could be the nose, it could be the whole face, but then you're thinking about adding less detail to the rest of the body. Actually, this is a good example. I've got my badger here, I don't know if you can see. So my intention is going to be to really focus on the face, add the most detail to the face, and then the body, you can't even see the body. The body, which is actually quite big, is going to be a lot blurrier. I'm intentionally not going to put as much detail in the body because I want the viewer to really concentrate on the face of the badger and having lots of lovely detail there. So really getting the light in the eyes and any colours that are in the eyes and the nose. Still a long way to go on this piece, but I just wanted to show you. And then the background again, blurry. This might change. It's definitely a work in progress. But my intention from the beginning has been to focus on the face of the badger, and I do that with most of my pieces, to be honest. And that's how you gain depth within your piece. You get that perspective, because if you look, if you look out into the garden, the things that are closer are obviously going to have a lot more detail than the things that are further away. You might find that you'll get like a little bit of a colour haze over the things that are further away. If you look at the fields, they look like they've got a little bit of a purpley glow. So there's not going to be as much detail. You're not going to be seeing it as clearly. And the same applies if you just are, it's just the body of the animal that's a little bit further away. It pushes the face forward and it creates that lovely depth within your painting or your drawing. The next thing I want to talk about is values. Now, you might have heard that term quite regularly. Artists talk about it all the time, but what do they actually mean? So values are your darks and your lights. So making sure that your darks are dark enough and your lights, your highlights, are the brightest that they need to be. So actually values are much more important than picking the perfect colour. A lot of artists, especially when you're starting out, struggle with, they say to me, well, which exact colour should I use for this? And actually values are much more important than the colours that we use. So if you decided to draw a dog completely in purple, but your values were right, so your darks were, the shadows and everything were as dark as they needed to be, in contrast to the highlights, then it would still look realistic even though it's created in purple. You might see that around. You see these kind of Highland cows and they've got all these different colours on them, or people create zebras that have beautiful rainbow colours within the stripes. They still look realistic. Of course, that there's an element of fantasy on them, but they still look realistic because the values are right. So another thing that artists struggle with, and it's very, very important with depth, is that you get your darks darker. Most of the time, people feel a little bit nervous about adding too much darkness because they think they might ruin the piece that they've worked on. They've worked really hard and they've gone over the whole piece, and it's very, very difficult to know how dark to go until the other parts of the piece are in. So I tend to, with my technique, is that I get something kind of 80 to 90% finished, and then I'll go back in at the end when everything's in place and work out how dark. So you usually need to darken the eyes, the nose, the ears, the shadow. So say if there's a shadow created under the chin, the back legs that are a little bit further away, you tend to have to darken that a lot more than you think. So you start putting dark in and you really think it looks dark until you start adding all of the other bits and you realise it's not dark enough at all. The other thing I found is that, especially with the polychromos black, it tends to kind of sink into the paper a little bit, or it might just be a bit of an illusion, but I always have to go back in. I tend to only use black in the darkest parts. Black, it's not something that you should avoid completely. I don't really agree with that. Some artists say, oh, you're not a real artist if you use black. I don't think that's true, because sometimes things are black, but it does create a little bit of a flatness. So what I would say is make sure that you've got lots of layers underneath. Maybe you've got some lovely colours underneath, or you can even layer on top. So don't just use black on its own, but definitely some things are black, like the pupil of an eye or a nose. So go darker, be brave, and just give it a go. Some of the, if you are using coloured pencils, some of the pencils that I think are brilliant for going darker is the dark sepia. If you use a really light glaze, then you don't lose any of the colours underneath. The warm grey 6 is also really good, as well as the cold grey 6, depending on whether it's warm or cool. Cool is more bluey and warm is more browns and reds. So go darker. And the other thing is highlights. If you're using white paper that actually isn't that white, you might find that your highlights aren't as bright as you want them to be. So there are a few options for that. You can either go for a really, really bright paper. Fabriano Artistico do like a very bright white paper, which is probably the brightest I've found. It's still not as bright as the brightest white that you want maybe in the highlight of an eye, in which case don't underestimate the white pencil, especially the luminance, because that pencil put down, even though you might not necessarily see it with your naked eye, there is going to be a difference to the paper and the white of the luminance pencil. So definitely make sure that you use that pencil. I would encourage you to use that a little bit more. And also there are options like you could use gouache, so painting. There is a product that you can use specifically with coloured pencil called brush and pencil, and touch up texture, which is like a powder that you mix with the solution and then you paint it on a little bit like a gouache or an acrylic, but it's specifically for coloured pencils. It doesn't crack and you can apply coloured pencil over the top. So if you're drawing whiskers with it, then you can neaten them off with a coloured pencil afterwards. People use gel pens, but they're not particularly archival. So if you are selling your work, just be a little bit cautious of that. And I think those are the options. With coloured pencil, you tend to go from light to dark, so you would leave your highlights out so that the paper does show through. With acrylic and oils, you tend to work the other way around, so from dark to light, so you can apply your highlights right at the very end, and there's something very satisfying about getting that really brilliant white. So don't be afraid to use different mediums with your colour pencil if you feel that you need a little bit more of a highlight. Is that everything about values? I think so. So the homework for today, or the takeaways for today: think about perspective, think about what focus you're going to have and what parts are possibly going to be blurry, what the viewer's going to be seeing. So objectively looking at your piece and not trying to add detail over the whole thing in a uniform manner, because it can look a little bit busy and also sometimes a little bit messy. And values, so making sure your darks are dark enough. I really encourage you to go a little bit darker than you think, and give it a go and see what you think. If you need to ask any questions, then please do. This is a safe space. No question is too silly or too small. We can all learn from them, definitely. So don't be afraid to ask. This is a lovely group, really safe. If you are watching on the replay, then please do say hello. It's always nice to speak to you and to gain a little bit of a community feel. I'm really finding that more important than ever, and I just love this group so much. It would be lovely if you could kind of interact, and you do tend to get more out of these things if you do. So please do say hello. Please do say if you've got any tips about values or perspective, what works for you, what doesn't. If you're struggling with anything that you could have help with, then I'm here for you. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about artistic self-expression. What does that mean? And yeah, so I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 10 o'clock, same time, same place. And I hope you have a lovely Monday, whatever you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for day 4. Lots of love and bye for now.